Tell them I'm your wife." The words came from beneath the canvas at the back of Caleb Mercer's supply wagon. He had been about to leave Briar's Crossing with flour, lamp oil, rifle cartridges, and enough coffee to endure another Montana winter. Instead, he stood in the muddy street, with one hand gripping the wagon flap and the other hovering near the revolver beneath his coat. A young woman crouched between two sacks of grain. Her blue traveling dress was torn near the knee, one sleeve bore a dark smear of mud, and damp curls had escaped the pins at the back of her head. She held a small carpet bag against her chest as if it contained the last pieces of her life. Judging by the bells ringing at the white chapel beyond the mercantile, it was supposed to have been her wedding day. Judging by the 4 armed riders turning into the street, the groom had noticed his bride was missing. Caleb studied her face. She was frightened, but not helpless. There was a difference. Helpless people waited for someone else to decide what happened next. This woman had climbed into a stranger's wagon and invented a marriage before he had even learned her name. "Who are they?" he asked. "Men who will drag me back if they find me." That isn't an answer. It is the only one we have time for. Hooves struck the frozen ground behind him. The woman pulled a silver thimble from her pocket and closed it tightly in her palm. Caleb noticed the gesture because his late brother Daniel had once held a brass watch in much the same way whenever he was trying not to show fear. Caleb let the canvas fall. "Lie down," he said. "Cover yourself with the buffalo robe." She obeyed immediately. Caleb climbed onto the wagon seat and gathered the reins. He had barely moved the horses 3 yards when the riders blocked the road. Their coats carried the black and gold emblem of Silas Harrow's Timber Company. Harrow owned the sawmill, the freight office, 2/3 of the businesses in Briar's Crossing, and enough frightened men to make the remaining third behave as though he owned them too. The lead rider was Everett Dane, Harrow's foreman. He had a narrow face, colorless eyes, and the unpleasant calm of a man accustomed to other people surrendering before he had to threaten them. "Mercer," Dane called. "Dane. You came through the church road?" "I came through half the town. It's difficult to buy supplies without doing so." Dane ignored the remark. "Did you see a young woman? Brown hair, blue dress, traveling alone?" Caleb glanced toward the chapel. Several townspeople had appeared in doorways, but none met his eyes. Briar's Crossing had perfected the art of witnessing injustice without appearing to notice it. "My wife is resting in the back," Caleb said. "She had a bad journey into town." Dane's gaze moved to the canvas. Caleb's pulse remained steady. He had spent 12 years managing cattle in country where a nervous horse, a broken axle, or a late snowfall could kill a man. 4 hired bullies did not frighten him as much as thin ice, though he respected both for their ability to cause trouble. "You never told anyone you were married," Dane said. No one asked. From beneath the canvas came a muffled cough. Then the young woman pushed the flap aside. In the few seconds she had been hidden, she had loosened her hair and wrapped one of Caleb's gray blankets around her shoulders. The fear had vanished from her expression, replaced by the weary irritation of a wife whose husband had allowed strangers to delay her journey. "Caleb," she said, as naturally as if she had spoken his name every morning for 10 years. "Must we remain in this wind?" Her performance was almost convincing. Almost. The silver thimble still left a small outline beneath the skin of her clenched hand. Caleb turned back to Dane. "You heard her." Dane rode nearer. His eyes settled on the woman's boots. They were soft black leather, made for a church aisle rather than a ranch yard, and one lace still carried a tiny white ribbon. Interesting shoes for a rancher's wife. "She did not marry the ranch," Caleb replied. "She married me." The woman looked at him, and for one brief second, surprise broke through her composure. Caleb flicked the reins. His horses stepped forward, forcing Dane either to move or be struck by the wagon tongue. The foreman moved. Caleb drove past without looking back. They reached the edge of town before he heard riders following them. "Stay down," he called. "They know," the woman answered. "They suspect. That is not the same thing. They work for Silas Harrow. Suspicion is usually enough for him." Caleb guided the wagon off the main trail and onto an abandoned logging road that climbed north through stands of lodgepole pine. The road had not been maintained since the old Brennan mill burned, and deep ruts jarred the wheels hard enough to shift the grain sacks. The young woman crawled forward and lowered herself onto the seat beside him. "My name is Nora Whitfield," she said. Caleb kept his eyes on the trail. "That would have been useful 5 minutes ago." "I did not expect you to help me." "Neither did I." She almost smiled, but the sound of distant horses erased it. "Where does this road lead?" "To my ranch, eventually." "And before eventually?" "To a narrow bridge, a steep ridge, and several opportunities to regret climbing into my wagon." "That still sounds better than the church." Caleb looked at her ruined dress and the white ribbon tied to her boot. "You were supposed to marry Harrow?" "Yes." "Did you agree to it?" "I agreed after he explained what would happen if I refused. I changed my mind when the chapel bells started." "That is rather late." "It was also my final opportunity." The old road divided beside a weathered marker. The easier branch descended toward the East Valley. The other climbed toward Wolfbone Ridge and Caleb's winter grazing range. He chose the ridge. Behind them, Dane's riders took the valley road. Nora released a breath. Caleb did not. The clouds gathering over the mountains concerned him more than Harrow's men. Their undersides were dark and heavy, and the wind carried the metallic smell that came before snow. "We have 3 hours of light," he said. "Tell me why the richest man in the county needed to frighten a woman into marrying him." Nora opened her hand. The silver thimble lay against her palm, marked by years of tiny scratches. "My mother owned a dress shop and a narrow strip of land south of town," she began. "The shop failed during her illness. Harrow paid for medicine, coal, and rent. At least, that was what my mother believed. But it was a loan. Several loans. The figures in his account book were not the figures she was told. After she died in June, I found interest added twice in the same months and charges for deliveries we never received. When I questioned him, he offered to forgive everything if I became his wife. He could have taken the shop. The shop is worthless to him." "The land, then?" Nora nodded. "A spring rises on it. Harrow's new timber camp sits 4 miles west, but the nearest reliable water crosses my property. He cannot run his flume or expand the mill without legal access to that spring." Caleb understood. Silas Harrow was nearly 60. He did not need a 24-year-old bride. He needed her signature. If you married him, your land became easier to control. If I refused, he intended to seize it through my mother's debt. And now? Now he will call me unstable, ungrateful, or stolen, whichever story gives him the most authority. Caleb had met men like Harrow before. They built reputations for generosity by giving desperate people ropes, then waited until the ropes were firmly around their necks before pulling. "Do you have the loan papers?" "No. Harrow keeps the originals." "Any proof the numbers were altered?" Nora touched the thimble. "Perhaps." Caleb waited. She did not continue. He let the silence remain. If she possessed evidence, forcing her to reveal it while Harrow's men were still within riding distance would not make them safer. The first snow reached them shortly before dusk. It began as scattered flakes and became a white curtain in less than 20 minutes. The road disappeared beneath the horses, the wind rose hard from the northwest, and the surrounding pines bent beneath its force. Caleb knew they would not reach the ranch. "There's a herder's cabin half a mile ahead," he said. "Can the horses make it?" "They must." Nora did not complain. She climbed down when the wagon bogged in a drift and pushed beside Caleb until both wheels found solid earth. By the time they reached the cabin, snow covered her hair and shoulders, and her thin boots were soaked through. The shelter was a one-room log structure with a stone hearth and a lean-to for livestock. Caleb unhitched the horses while Nora carried supplies inside. When he entered, she had already found the dry kindling stored beneath the bunk and arranged it properly beneath the larger pieces of wood. "You know how to build a fire," he observed. "My mother taught me many useful things. Most men simply noticed the dresses." The flame caught. Caleb hung their wet coats beside the hearth. The cabin contained one narrow bunk, a wooden stool, a rough table, and 3 cracked bowls. Nora examined the room without dismay, as though she were measuring a difficult piece of cloth and deciding where to place the first cut. I'll sleep near the fire, Caleb said. You take the bunk. I will not put you on the floor of your own cabin. It belongs to the ranch, not to my pride. You helped me escape armed men. I can survive a wooden floor. And I can survive an argument. Take the bunk. She studied him, perhaps searching for a hidden demand behind the offer. Whatever she saw persuaded her. Thank you, she said. Caleb made coffee while Nora sliced salt pork and mixed flour with water for biscuits. She did not ask permission before working, nor did she pretend to be helpless so that gratitude might be demanded of her later. She simply saw what needed doing and did half of it. They ate while the blizzard buried the logging road. Nora had not touched the silver thimble since entering the cabin. It sat on the table between them, reflecting firelight from its worn surface. My mother gave me that on my 12th birthday, she said when she noticed Caleb looking. She told me a small tool could save a person if she learned where to place the stitches. Did she mean dresses? At the time. And now? Now I think she meant lives. Caleb drank his coffee. My brother left me the Mercer Ranch, he said. Daniel died 5 years ago, pneumonia. I'm sorry. He served as a clerk at the county records office before we came west. He remembered every document he ever read and expected the rest of us to do the same. I disappointed him regularly. Nora smiled faintly. If Harrow attached your mother's land to those loans, Caleb continued, there should be a recorded lien. If he did not, he cannot simply take the property because he says he can. He controls the county clerk. He controls the current clerk. He did not control my brother 5 years ago. Nora's hand stopped beside her bowl. What are you saying? Daniel copied unusual filings. He believed powerful men became careless when they thought no one was keeping a second record. His papers are still at my ranch. Hope appeared on Nora's face, but she restrained it quickly. My mother's first agreement with Harrow was signed 4 years ago. Then Daniel may have copied it. Outside, the wind struck the cabin walls with enough force to shake loose dust from the rafters. Nora stared at the silver thimble. For the first time since he had found her, she looked exhausted rather than frightened. Why are you helping me? She asked. Caleb considered giving her an easy answer. Easy answers were often the least honest kind. Because Harrow's men were searching for you as if you were stolen property, he said. Because you asked for time, not rescue. And because my brother despised men who altered paper to make theft appear lawful. Nora nodded slowly. She picked up Caleb's coat, examined a tear near the shoulder, and threaded a needle from the little kit in her bag. You do not owe me work, he said. I know. Then why are you repairing that? Because tomorrow you will wear it into the cold, and the tear will become larger. That coat has been torn since August. Then it has been waiting patiently for me. He watched her place the silver thimble on her finger. Her stitches were tight, even, and almost invisible. Caleb had lived alone long enough to recognize when a room changed because another person occupied it. The cabin remained cold near the walls. The storm still howled outside. Harrow's men still stood between them and an uncomplicated future. Yet the place no longer felt like a shelter two strangers happened to share. It felt, for one dangerous moment, like the beginning of something neither of them had intended. They reached the Mercer Ranch late the following afternoon. The house stood in a shallow valley protected by dark timber, with 2 barns, a stone well, and nearly 600 acres stretching south toward the frozen creek. Smoke rose from the chimney because Caleb had banked the fire before leaving. Nora stepped down from the wagon and looked at the long porch, the repaired fences, and the empty second chair beside the front door. You maintain all this alone? She asked. With 2 hired hands during the summer, alone after the first snow. That sounds inefficient. It has been sufficient. Those are not the same thing. Caleb looked at her. She held his gaze without apology. Inside, he showed her the room that had belonged to Daniel. It was clean but unchanged, the shelves still holding law books, maps, and 3 wooden boxes filled with papers. Nora touched the lid of the nearest box. May I? Tomorrow, Caleb said. Tonight you eat and sleep. I should begin searching now. You have been running since yesterday morning. So have you. This is my home. I am allowed to be foolish in it. That earned him her first full laugh. It was warmer than the fire and far more unsettling. After supper, Nora stood at the guest room window, watching snow gather across the ranch yard. The northern pass would be closed within days. Until spring, reaching Briar's Crossing would become nearly impossible. She could not return. Harrow could not easily come after her. For the moment, the mountain had placed a wall between them. Caleb believed that wall would give them time to find the truth hidden in Daniel's records. He did not yet know that Silas Harrow had already sent a man toward the territorial capital with a marriage certificate bearing Nora Whitfield's forged signature. Nor did Nora know that one of the papers sewn beneath the lining of her blue dress could destroy Harrow if she survived long enough to place it in the right hands. The northern pass closed 3 days after Nora Whitfield arrived at the Mercer Ranch. Snow swallowed the road first, filling the wagon ruts until the trail became indistinguishable from the fields beside it. Then the wind drove drifts against the lower slopes of Wolfbone Ridge. By the end of the week, even a determined rider would have needed ropes, snowshoes, and a powerful dislike of remaining alive to cross the mountains. Nora would spend the winter at Caleb's ranch. On her second morning, she came into the kitchen wearing a plain brown dress and carrying the first wooden box from Daniel's room. Caleb looked up from the stove. "I thought we agreed you would rest." "You agreed. I was too tired to correct you." She placed the box on the table. It contained property maps, tax notices, copied contracts, and bundles of correspondence tied with string. Daniel Mercer had written notes in the margins, using a precise hand so small that Nora needed to hold some pages near the window. Caleb set a plate of biscuits beside her. "You cannot defeat Silas Harrow before breakfast." "I can begin." "You can begin after eating." Nora looked at the biscuit, then at him. "Are you always this commanding?" "Only when defending helpless food." She ate. They worked through the first box until noon. Daniel's papers documented land sales, grazing disputes, and mining claims, but nothing carried the Whitfield name. The second box produced an old territorial map showing Nora's spring and the timber tract west of it. Someone, probably Daniel, had drawn a red line from the spring to the mill site and written one question beside it. Who controls the water if the south parcel changes hands? Nora traced the line with one finger. "He noticed," she whispered. "He noticed nearly everything." Did he know Harrow? Daniel distrusted him. Why? Because Harrow was polite whenever he wanted something dishonest. Caleb opened the third box. It contained several ledgers and a thick stack of copied filings from Daniel's final year at the records office. They searched until the daylight faded. Nothing. That night, Nora returned the papers to their proper bundles, recording the contents of each box on separate sheets. Caleb watched her establish a system more orderly than the one Daniel had left. "You kept the dress shop's accounts," he said. "My mother could make a coat fit a man from 3 measurements, but numbers offended her personally. I managed the books from the time I was 16. "Then how did Harrow deceive you?" "He did not show me his books until after she died. By then, he had replaced promises with figures and called the difference lawful." She folded her list. "Men like Harrow depend on decent people being ashamed that they were deceived. Shame keeps them silent." "You do not sound ashamed." "I was." Nora looked toward the dark window. "Then I climbed into your wagon." Terror has a way of pushing lesser concerns out of the room. The evidence did not emerge quickly. Winter work allowed little respect for mysteries. Cattle required feed regardless of whether Silas Harrow was a criminal. Ice had to be broken from the trough every morning. Snow needed clearing from the barn roofs before its weight broke the rafters. Nora insisted on earning her place. Caleb initially assigned her work inside the house, believing this was considerate. Nora correctly identified it as an assumption and corrected him. "I can carry hay," she said. "You weigh half as much as a bale. Then I will carry half a bale twice." She did. He taught her to read the weather from the cattle's behavior and to check fences after a hard wind. She learned to use a splitting maul without exhausting herself and to approach the ranch's temperamental red bull from the side rather than the front. In exchange, she reorganized the food stores, repaired 3 harnesses, and discovered that the ranch had been paying twice for salt delivered through Harrow's freight office. Caleb brought her the receipts. Nora arranged them by date. These two carry the same shipment number. One is from August, the other is from September. Exactly. He charged you twice for one wagon load. Harrow's office handles half the freight in the county. Then he may be doing it to half the county. Caleb sat across from her. The discovery did not prove what Harrow had done to Nora's mother, but it revealed a method: duplicate charges disguised by different dates. Nora began checking every receipt Daniel had saved. She found 7 repeated shipment numbers involving 4 ranches. The work changed the rhythm of the house. Caleb still rose before dawn, but now a lamp often burned in the kitchen when he returned from the barn. Nora would be sitting at the table with her hair loosely tied and Daniel's papers spread around her. Sometimes she had coffee ready. Sometimes she had forgotten the coffee entirely and looked offended when Caleb reminded her that human beings required food. He began leaving notes beside her ledgers. East fence buried again. Do not attempt it alone. She wrote beneath it, I shall bring a shovel and attempt it with good company. Another morning he left. Young brindle cow is close to calving. Keep away unless I'm there. Her answer read, she was in distress at 2. Calf delivered safely at 3. Both alive. Your warning arrived at 4. He found her asleep in the barn, wrapped in his old coat, with the newborn calf breathing against the straw beside her. Her hands were stained, her hair was a disaster, and the silver thimble hung from a cord around her neck. Caleb carried her into the house. Nora woke before he reached the porch. I can walk. I know. Then put me down. You can object when you are fully awake. I am fully awake. You asked me whether the calf required baptism. She went silent. I was tired, she said at last. He almost laughed. He set her gently in the chair beside the stove and covered her with a blanket. Then he made breakfast while she pretended not to watch him. Respect arrived before either of them recognized affection. It grew from the things they observed when the other person had no reason to perform. Nora saw Caleb ride into a storm to mend a fence, because loose cattle might wander onto a neighbor's poorer grazing land. She saw him divide the last barrel of apples with a widower 5 miles east, then insist the exchange was payment for help given the previous summer. Caleb saw Nora cut apart her best petticoat to bandage a wounded mare. He saw her spend 3 nights recalculating freight charges for ranchers she had never met, simply because they might also have been robbed. Neither spoke of love. The winter had enough dangerous weather without inviting another kind into the house. Shortly before Christmas, Nora found the Whitfield document. It had been folded into the back of a ledger recording water claims. Daniel had copied the original loan agreement between Harrow and Nora's mother 4 years earlier. The note listed a principal debt of $320 at 6% annual interest. The dress shop's equipment, not the south parcel, was named as security. Nora read it 3 times. Then she pressed both hands against the table. Caleb came in carrying firewood and stopped when he saw her face. Is it there? She turned the copy toward him. He changed it, she said. The paper Harrow showed me after Mother died listed $980. It named the land as collateral and carried a rate of 18%. Caleb read Daniel's copy. This proves the terms were different when the agreement was recorded. If the territorial authorities accept your brother's copy. Daniel signed and dated it. 2 witnesses signed the filing log. It may save the land. It will. Nora wanted to believe him, but Harrow controlled more than papers. He employed armed men, influenced the local judge, and owned the only reliable route through which evidence could leave the county during winter. There's something I have not told you, she said. She went to Daniel's room and returned with the blue dress she had worn while escaping. Sitting beside the window, she removed the silver thimble from its cord and placed it on her finger. Then she opened 3 stitches inside the skirt lining. Caleb watched her withdraw, a folded sheet no larger than his palm. My mother found this in Harrow's office last spring, Nora explained. She had gone there to ask why her balance never became smaller. His clerk left the room while she was waiting. This was lying beneath his account book. The paper listed payments collected from 6 borrowers including Nora's mother. Beside each payment was a second number labeled private balance. The official figures decreased, while the private balances increased. At the bottom was an instruction written in Harrow's hand. Carry unpaid additions into the next quarter. Do not enter them in the customer copies. Why didn't your mother expose him? Caleb asked. She was already ill. Harrow told her no one would believe she had found it honestly. Then he threatened to accuse me of stealing from the dress shop's customers. So she hid it. She stitched it into this dress and told me never to remove the lining unless I found someone who understood what it meant. Caleb looked at the silver thimble. A small tool could save a person if she knew where to place the stitches. This and Daniel's copy established the method, he said. The freight receipts show Harrow continued using it. But we still need to get the evidence beyond his reach. The territorial marshal maintains an office at Fort Benton. In winter, mail sleds travel through Pine Creek once each month. The next one should arrive in 9 days. Pine Creek lay 17 miles east. The route remained passable, but only in stable weather. They prepared 3 packets. One held Daniel's copy of the original loan. The second contained Harrow's private account sheet. The third contained Nora's comparison of the duplicate freight charges. Caleb wrote a statement explaining where Daniel's records had been found. They kept the originals at the ranch and made handwritten copies for the marshal. On the 8th night, the temperature fell sharply. By morning, the sky was clear, and the air held the brittle stillness that often preceded another storm. Caleb saddled 2 horses. You are staying here, he told Nora. The evidence belongs to me. The cold does not care. Neither does Harrow. If something happens on the trail, if something happens to you, I am left here without knowing whether the packet reached Pine Creek. Caleb tightened the saddle strap harder than necessary. I am trying to keep you safe. No, you are trying to make the decision for me because you are afraid. He looked at her. She had touched the truth and knew it. Caleb had lost Daniel after dismissing the first signs of his illness. His brother had claimed it was only a cough. Caleb had accepted that answer because cattle were missing and a storm was coming. By the time he rode for the doctor, the mountain pass had closed. Since then, he had confused protection with preventing anyone from taking risks he could not control. Nora stepped closer. You did not force me to tell you my story, she said. You did not demand the paper from my dress. Do not begin treating me like Harrow now simply because you care what happens to me. The word care remained between them. Caleb lowered his hands from the saddle. You ride beside me, he said, not ahead. I can accept that. And if I say the weather is turning, we come home. If the weather is truly turning. He gave her a look. She smiled and mounted her horse. They reached Pine Creek shortly before dusk. The mail driver, Amos Bell, sealed their packet inside a canvas pouch bound for Fort Benton. Nora watched him mark the destination and lock the pouch beneath the driver's seat. For the first time since her escape, the evidence was beyond Harrow's immediate reach. On the return journey, the storm caught them. Snow erased the trail, and Nora's mare stumbled near a frozen ravine. Caleb dismounted and led both horses, while Nora kept the lantern covered beneath her coat. Its light was faint, but it allowed them to follow the fence posts marking the southern edge of Mercer land. The lantern went out less than a mile from the ranch. Caleb could no longer see the posts. Nora removed the silver thimble from her cord. What are you doing? She placed it over the lantern's broken wick guide, holding the damaged metal in position, while Caleb relit the flame. The thimble grew hot against her protected finger, but the lamp remained burning. By that small circle of light, they found the barn. Inside, Caleb took her hand and removed the thimble carefully. A red mark crossed the base of her finger. You burned yourself. It will heal. You could have dropped it. And lost the light. It was your mother's. Nora looked at him. She gave it to me to use, not to worship. Caleb closed his hand around hers. He wanted to tell her that the ranch no longer felt like the place where Daniel had died. He wanted to explain that each morning he listened for her footsteps before he opened his eyes. He wanted to say that he had begun imagining spring and found he hated every version of it in which she left. Instead, he said, I'm glad you were beside me. So am I. For a moment, neither moved. Then a horse cried outside. Caleb released her hand and drew his revolver. A rider had reached the ranch ahead of the storm. He was slumped across his saddle, half frozen and bleeding from a wound above his ear. Caleb recognized Amos Bell, the mail driver. They pulled him inside and laid him beside the stove. When Amos regained consciousness, he gripped Caleb's sleeve. "Dane stopped the sled," he whispered. 3 miles beyond Pine Creek. Took the marshal's pouch. Nora went pale. The packet? Gone. Amos reached inside his coat and produced a single torn envelope. "I hid this one beneath the seat before they searched me. It was not their evidence." It bore the seal of the Briars Crossing Courthouse and Nora Whitfield's name. Caleb broke it open. Inside was a certified copy of a marriage record stating that Nora Whitfield had legally married Silas Harrow 2 days before she fled the town. Her signature appeared at the bottom beside the names of 2 witnesses. The signature was perfect. Nora stared at it. "I never signed that." Caleb read the final paragraph. As Nora's lawful husband, Harrow claimed authority over her property and requested assistance returning her to the marital home. "He does not merely intend to take the spring," Caleb said. Hooves sounded beyond the house. Not one horse. Several. Through the window, lanterns appeared between the trees. Everett Dane rode at the front. Behind him came 5 armed men, and Silas Harrow himself, carrying a court order that named Nora as his wife. Caleb folded the forged certificate and placed it in his pocket. Nora reached for the silver thimble, but her hand no longer trembled. All winter they had searched for a way to bring Harrow before the law. Now Harrow had brought his lie directly to their door. Silas Harrow stopped his horse 10 yards from the Mercer porch. Snow clung to the shoulders of his black coat, but he sat straight in the saddle with the composure of a man who believed weather, law, and human beings could all be persuaded to move aside for him. Everett Dane and 5 riders spread across the yard behind him. Caleb stepped outside and closed the door, leaving Nora and the injured mail driver beside the stove. He carried his revolver, but kept it holstered. "This is private property," he said. Harrow lifted a folded document. "My wife is inside that house. No wife of yours has ever crossed my threshold. I have a certified marriage record and a court order authorizing her return." "Then read the order aloud." Harrow's expression changed slightly. Caleb had spent the winter reading Daniel's papers. His brother had written repeatedly about the difference between an order issued by a judge and a request prepared by a clerk. Powerful men depended on ordinary people being too frightened to examine the paper waved in their faces. "I did not ride through a blizzard to debate language with a cattleman," Harrow said. "You rode through a blizzard because language is the only weapon you have that still frightens anyone." Behind Caleb, the door opened. Nora came onto the porch wearing her brown work dress, Caleb's repaired coat, and the silver thimble hanging against her chest. He turned toward her. "You do not have to face him." "I know." She stepped beside him, not behind him. Harrow's gaze hardened. "Nora, you have caused enough embarrassment. Come down, and I will consider overlooking what happened." "What happened," she said, "was that I escaped you. You abandoned a lawful marriage." "There was no marriage." Harrow displayed the document. "The county record says otherwise." "Then let us examine it." Harrow did not move. "You wanted me frightened of paper," Nora continued. "You should not have given me an entire winter to learn how it lies." Caleb drew the certified copy from his pocket. "This document calls itself a court order," he said, "but it carries no judge's signature. It was prepared by Deputy Clerk Samuel Voss and merely requests local assistance. No arrest warrant. No finding of marriage. No authority to enter my land." The riders looked toward Harrow. "This is a domestic matter," Harrow said. "Ward, you are interfering with a husband's rights." "My name is Mercer," Caleb replied. "If your paper cannot even identify the property owner you intend to threaten, I doubt Daniel would have considered it impressive." Nora took the marriage record from Caleb and held it toward the lantern beside the door. "My supposed marriage occurred on October 17th at 4 in the afternoon, she said. "It claims Reverend Abel Cross performed the ceremony in Harrow's private office. That is correct, Harrow said. No, it is convenient. Her eyes moved down the page. The first witness is Everett Dane. The second is Samuel Voss, the clerk who certified this copy. That means every person supporting the marriage either works for you or profits from your business. That does not invalidate their testimony. No, but this might. Nora pointed to the signature attributed to her. My name is written perfectly because it was copied from the dress shop's customer accounts, but I never sign legal papers as Nora Whitfield. For the first time, uncertainty crossed Harrow's face. My legal name is Lenora Ann Whitfield. It appears on my mother's will, her original loan, and the deed to the spring. Daniel Mercer's copy confirms it. Whoever forged this record knew the name everyone called me, but never examined the documents closely enough to learn the name I use under oath. Dane shifted in his saddle. Harrow turned toward him. The look lasted only a second, but it carried enough accusation to reveal more than any confession. Nora saw it. So Dane brought the signature, she said, and Voss prepared the certificate. You cannot prove that, Harrow answered. A weak voice came from inside the house. I can prove Dane robbed the territorial mail. Amos Bell appeared in the doorway with a bandage wrapped around his head. He supported himself against the frame, but his eyes remained clear. Everett Dane stopped my sled at gunpoint, he said. He struck me and took a locked government pouch containing evidence addressed to the territorial marshal. Harrow looked at Dane as though seeing a disposable tool rather than a loyal employee. I gave no order to interfere with the mail, he said. Dane stared at him. You told me the packet could destroy every land agreement you made in this county. I told you no such thing. You gave me the route and the date. Harrow's abandonment settled over Dane more heavily than the snow. For years, the foreman had borrowed authority from Harrow's wealth. Now, facing a federal charge, he discovered that borrowed authority carried no protection when repayment came due. You said Voss had already fixed the marriage record, Dane continued. You said once she was declared your wife, no one would care what was in her packet. Be quiet. You promised to send a lawyer. I will not defend a fool who attacked a mail driver without instruction. Dane's face emptied. He reached beneath his coat. Caleb's hand moved toward his revolver, but Dane drew out the canvas pouch taken from Amos's sled. He dropped it into the snow between the horses. The evidence is still sealed, Dane said. I never opened it. Harrow turned his horse toward him. Pick that up. Dane dismounted instead. One of the other riders began backing his horse away. Another lowered the rifle he had been holding across his saddle. Harrow had arrived with 6 men. Within minutes, he had only 3 who still appeared willing to obey him. Nora descended the porch steps and retrieved the mail pouch. Caleb moved beside her, but he did not take it from her hands. Harrow watched them. You think a few copied papers will destroy me? He asked. I own the mill. I control the freight road. Half the men in this county owe me money. That is exactly the problem, Nora said. Their debts resemble my mother's. Duplicate freight charges, private balances, interest that appears only in your books. Daniel copied the original agreements. I calculated the alterations. You stole confidential records. My mother found 1 page. The rest came from your own receipts. Harrow's mouth tightened. Caleb looked at the riders. How many of you have family members who borrowed from him? No one answered immediately. Then a gray-bearded rider named Lucas Morrow lowered his eyes. My brother lost 80 acres after a $400 loan became $1,200, he said. Another man dismounted. My father's account never went down either. Harrow's power had always depended on each victim believing he suffered alone. Nora's numbers placed the injuries beside one another and gave the pattern a name. Fraud. You will regret this, Harrow told her. I spent 6 months regretting that I ever trusted you, she said. I am finished carrying your share. Harrow reached toward his coat. Caleb stepped in front of Nora. 3 rifles rose, not from Caleb's house, but from Harrow's former riders. Harrow froze. No shot was fired. None was needed. He looked at the sealed mail pouch, at Amos Bell in the doorway, and at Everett Dane standing apart from the remaining horses. He finally understood that his authority had not been taken from him. It had simply stopped being loaned to him by frightened men. Harrow turned his horse and rode into the snow. Only 2 riders followed. Dane remained at the ranch. When the storm cleared, Caleb and Lucas Morrow escorted him and Amos to Pine Creek. Dane provided a signed statement describing the forged marriage record, the assault on the mail sled, and the instructions Harrow had given him. The recovered packet continued to Fort Benton. The investigation began before the end of February. Territorial officers arrived in Briar's Crossing with warrants for Harrow and Deputy Clerk Voss. They seized the mill ledgers, the private debt books, and the marriage register. Beneath the page carrying Nora's forged record, investigators found scoring marks where Voss had removed an earlier entry and written over it. The supposed Reverend Abel Cross had never been authorized to perform marriages in the territory. His name belonged to a traveling salesman who had left Montana 2 years earlier. Harrow tried to flee toward Canada, but was detained at a freight station north of Fort Benton. Voss agreed to testify. Dane did the same. By March, the forged marriage had been struck from the record. The debt against Nora's mother's estate was declared fraudulent, and the south parcel, including the spring, was confirmed as Nora's property. The other borrowers named in Harrow's private accounts began filing claims of their own. When the official letter arrived, Nora read it twice at the kitchen table. Then she placed it beside Daniel's copy of the loan and covered her face with both hands. Caleb did not touch her immediately. He understood by then that relief, like grief, sometimes needed room before it could accept company. When she lowered her hands, he was still sitting across from her. "It is mine," she said. "Yes. He cannot take it." "No. My mother was telling the truth." She was. Nora pressed the silver thimble into her palm, but this time she was smiling. In April, the snow softened. Water began running beneath the ice, and dark earth appeared along the southern slopes. The pass would open within 2 weeks. Caleb became quieter as the road cleared. Nora noticed. One evening, after the supper dishes had been washed, he placed a folded map on the table. It showed the route to Briar's Crossing and the roads leading onward toward Helena and Fort Benton. "I can take you wherever you choose," he said. "Your property is secure. You could reopen the dress shop, sell the spring, or begin somewhere no one knows Harrow's name." Nora studied the map. "What will you do?" "Return to the ranch." "Alone?" Caleb looked toward Daniel's empty chair. "I have managed it before." "That was not my question." He folded his hands. He had faced armed men without losing his words, yet now each sentence required courage. "I do not want you to remain because winter trapped you here," he said. "I do not want gratitude mistaken for obligation, and I will not offer marriage as payment for helping you." "What are you offering?" "The truth." He looked at her. "This house was where my brother died. For 5 years I preserved it, because changing anything felt like losing him again. Then you came here. You moved his papers, repaired my coat, delivered a calf after ignoring an excellent warning, and filled every room with evidence that life was still happening." Nora's eyes shone, but she did not look away. "When I found you in my wagon," Caleb continued, "I called you my wife because it was the fastest lie I could think of. Now it is the one truth I am most afraid to ask for." Nora touched the map. "I do not want to be taken anywhere." Caleb waited. "I want to go to Briar's Crossing long enough to settle my mother's affairs," she said. "Then I want to come home." "Home?" "The place where my ledgers occupy half the kitchen table. The place where a stubborn man leaves warnings I ignore only when necessary." "That is most of them. The place where Daniel's records saved my land because his brother kept them safe. The place where I no longer have to pretend to be someone's wife to be protected." Caleb reached across the table. This time Nora placed her hand in his before he could ask. "I live here," she said. "If you still want me when the roads are open, I will want you when every road in Montana is open." They married in May beside the spring on Nora's land. She wore a cream-colored dress she had sewn herself. The silver thimble had repaired its final seam that morning. Amos Bell attended with a thin scar above his ear. Lucas Morrow brought his family, and even Everett Dane sent a letter from the territorial jail admitting that Nora had shown more courage in one winter than he had managed in 20 years. Nora did not sell the spring. She leased water access at a fair rate to a cooperative of small ranchers and mill workers, ensuring that no single man could use it to control the valley again. She and Caleb expanded the Mercer Ranch together. He taught her cattle and weather. She taught him accounts, and the dangerous habit of speaking before silence made decisions for him. In time, the room that had belonged to Daniel became a records office. Nora kept copies of every contract, debt, and property agreement brought to her by families who could not afford a lawyer. Above the desk sat Daniel's first wooden box. The silver thimble remained in use. It repaired Caleb's coats, patched the knees of 2 children, and helped sew the blue cover of a family ledger in which Nora recorded births, harvests, storms, and the names of every rancher who drew water from the Whitfield Spring. 40 years later, the original cream wedding dress still hung in a cedar chest. Its seams remained strong. So did the life built by the 2 people who had begun with a frightened request inside a supply wagon. Nora had asked Caleb to call her his wife until they escaped town. By spring, neither of them could call it a lie. Would you have trusted Caleb's protection, or would you have kept running alone? In the next frontier story, a widowed rancher opens her barn to a wounded stranger, then discovers the brand on his saddle belongs to the men trying to steal her land.